Hello and welcome to Portfolio Matters. Today we will be discussing the graphene manufacturer Versarian. But before we do that, Richard will read us the disclaimer.
Everything discussed during the Portfolio Matters podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. Listeners should be aware that we will be discussing securities that we own or have a financial interest in. Please do your own research or consult a professional investment advisor before making any decisions regarding topics mentioned on the show. A full disclaimer can be found at the end.
Thank you, Richard. So my conclusion on Versarian will be that it's a high-tech speculative company that is almost impossible to value. But its current market cap is around 128 million. It's loss-making. And it's been loss-making for the last 8 years. And although the share price may go up, I think that it's impossible to value. And frankly, I'm not going to get involved. Okay, so anyway, what are the positives? Well, the positives are there's sort of futuristic nonsense that the market currently loves. Have you seen the valuation of Tesla? The share price is rising. It's up 60% in the last month after the Landsted subscription agreement. And frankly, that's why it's caught my attention. It's recently got a 5 million Innovate UK grant. And after 8 years, it's actually sold some graphene. And the thing about the Landsted subscription agreement is that they have agreed to sell Landsted shares each month at a price of 40p, but participate in any share price upside. So the higher the share price is, the more money they get. Negatives. It's now been on the market for 8 years, during which time it has delivered very little. Now, Richard and I know from our experience as angel investors that if there is a new product that the market needs and is willing to pay for, then it is adopted really very quickly. So we find in our angel investments that within 18 months, you know whether a company is going to be a success or not. Generally, you know within 6 months. Now, this company has been plugging away for 8 years and has got very little traction. So the question is, are the products that it's producing sufficiently innovative or a sufficient advance at the right price for anyone willing to pay for them? And currently all the evidence is no. As evidence of that, sales actually declined last year. Now they're blaming that on COVID, but given the year end is March, I find that difficult to believe. It's always jam tomorrow. Now, various people have described the Landsted subscription agreement as death spiral financing, and I don't think it is. Death spiral financing generally involves the sale of a certain number of shares for a fixed amount each month. So essentially you get the same amount and the number of shares you deliver for that amount varies. And so as the share price declines, you issue more and more shares. Now, this is different in they're selling the same number of shares each month and participating or positively and negatively with the change in the share price. The other thing I should say is that they have consistently, over the last 8 years, issued a lot of shares to fund the company. And so now its market cap is 128 million, which for a company with sales of 9 million is, I would say, very high. And given the sales are not really moving, it's a zero growth company with market cap 128 million. Anyway, so Versarian has been going for 8 years now, and the IP comes out of the University of Manchester, who were the discoverers of graphene. And they make this nanoflake graphene and claim to be the only ones in the UK making graphene of sufficiently thin layers. So obviously graphite is multi-layered graphene. And if you have too many layers in graphene, it simply becomes graphite. So you need to get down to only a few layers for it to be to demonstrate the properties of graphene. So in the 2020 annual report, they make a big deal of having produced and sold 120,000 graphene impregnated protective face masks. And my thought on looking at this was, is that it? The high-tech wonder material, the best use you can get out of it is putting it in face masks. I mean, really.
Does it have any antimicrobial properties, Keith, as far as you know, graphene?
I don't think so. I think perhaps it's better at filtration. I mean, you know, the small holes in graphene, I don't actually, frankly, I've got no idea why you'd want to put graphene in a face mask. Okay. I mean, the graphene is generally used. The properties of graphene are that it's a wonderful conductor and that it's very strong. So normally you use it either for conductivity or strengthening. So I have actually been to Versarian's headquarters years ago, and they gave us some carbon fiber, one of which had been doped with graphene and one hadn't. And the relative stiffness of the two was there was a very strong difference. Over the years, Versarian has basically survived by promising an unending stream of collaborations which will eventually lead to huge sales of their wonder product. The trouble is, the history of this company is full of these trials which just lead nowhere. You never hear from them again. You know, they're in the annual report, we're doing this collaboration, and then silence. Where are the sales? So if you look at the annual report, you'll see that actually they did sell some graphene, 4.8 million's worth, but sales were actually down on the previous year. Although you can't see that here actually. But anyway, which they are blaming on the disruption of COVID. But if this is a super fast growing company, the disruption of 1.5 months worth of sales really shouldn't have impacted sales that much at all, I would have thought. Okay, so the Lanstead financing deal. Lanstead will buy 8.75 million ordinary shares at 40p over the next 18 months, total commitment of 3.5 million. And you'll see from the table below that essentially the higher the share price, the more money they get. So,
Keith, just you say capital investors committed by 8.75 million ordinary shares at 40p with a total value of.
Yeah.
But if they're buying them at 40p, then the net proceeds will always be the same, won't they?
Yes. Well, so this is what they put in the annual report. So you're absolutely right. They're assuming that the share price stays at 40p to get that 3.
Oh, and this is this. But then they put an illustrative table in saying this was what would happen if the share price changed.
Yes, that's right. Now, I should also add that if you look at the 2020 annual report, this is the second Lanstead agreement. And the first Lanstead agreement, they did a Monte Carlo simulation of what they thought the Lanstead agreement would actually provide them in cash compared to the actual headline number. And on the basis of that Monte Carlo simulation, they concluded that it would provide them with 975 grand more than the headline number. And on the basis of that Monte Carlo simulation, they booked to the profit and loss account a gain of 975 grand,
Okay.
which I thought was extraordinary and smacked of desperation.
Well, it's interesting, Keith, isn't it? Something to bear in mind, I guess.
Absolutely. So anyway, this is my personal history of trading in Versarian. So I bought it when it was really small speculative stuff. And when the share price picked up, I sold a bit of it and I sold all of it. And obviously the share price peaked in 2008 at over £1.80.
Yeah.
And it has recently perked up again, having been down into the mid 30s and low 30s during 2020 on the back of this Landsted agreement.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, it's issued a hell of a lot of shares. And as I said, its market cap is 128 million. So this is the share price over the last month, and it's on a tear, you know, up 60%. So in summary,
it seems to me that it's got caught. The share price has got caught up with the alternative energy bubble, hasn't it? Wave, because I think people might be hoping that graphene is usable in batteries or conductivity or something like that. So
yes, no, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
You'll see when I've looked at various battery makers, they've actually talked about using graphene in the battery. But anyway, and frankly, there's always hope. You know, it could be the new wonder material. And clearly they've signed lots of collaboration agreements to try and test this out. And the question is, you know, whether you believe that this will come to something.
Yeah.
But currently, I mean, looking at the history of the company, nothing has ever happened. So the bottom line is, you know, who knows? It's impossible to value, but there's no margin of safety.
Yeah.
You know, with the margin of, if the market cap was 15 or 20 million, you think, well, one good collaboration and this share price would fly.
Yeah.
And my feeling is the share price has now flown and the market cap is 128 million. And in order for it to be worth a lot more, it would actually have to start delivering. And
presumably, Keith, when the share price was near £2, the market cap was lower than 128 million, or certainly wasn't. It's not, you can't take the 70p current share price, multiply it by 3 and say it's equivalent to a £2 share price in 2011 or whatever the peak was.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the things that I tried to find but couldn't is a graph of the market cap rather than the share price.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, Versarian is a piece of speculative nonsense that you may wish to own because the market likes speculative nonsense at the moment. But apart from that, don't bother.
Thank you, Keith. Very interesting. Your advice is to steer clear.
Steer clear.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Press like and subscribe. Bye.
Goodbye. Full disclaimer. The material and information contained in this podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon for making a business, legal or any other decision. We may own or have a financial interest in any securities mentioned. Listeners should conduct their own research or consult a professional investment advisor before making any decisions regarding topics mentioned on the show. Whilst we endeavour to ensure that the information presented on the show is correct, we make no representations or warranties of any kind, express or implied, with respect to the podcast and website or to any information, products, services or related graphics discussed or presented in the podcast or website. Any reliance you place on such material is strictly at your own risk. You are solely responsible for the investment decisions you make. We will not be responsible for any errors or omissions in the podcast or website, including in articles or postings, for hyperlinks embedded in messages, or for any results obtained from the use of such information. Nor will we be liable for any loss or damage, including consequential damages, if any, caused by a reader's reliance on any information provided by the podcast or website. Please do not listen to the podcast if you do not accept self-responsibility for your actions.